The bus was packed, the smell of sweat and exhaust thick in the air, but the tension inside was palpable, almost electric. A frail old woman, her hands shaking, clutched her purse tightly as she sat in the corner, a quiet presence among the bustling crowd. But her son, her own flesh and blood, was standing right next to her, and what came out of his mouth was a venomous assault that no one expected, least of all her. "You're so useless, Mom. Why can't you just stay home? You're embarrassing me." His voice was loud, dripping with disdain, and it felt like the bus held its breath. But just as the moment seemed unbearable, just when Mary thought she couldn't take another word of it, something extraordinary happened. From the back of the bus, a voice cut through the thick silence, a voice that everyone instantly recognized. "Kid, you better watch how you speak to your mother." Clint Eastwood. Yes, the Clint Eastwood, the man who had become a legend for his roles as the tough, unyielding hero, was now standing up for Mary in a way no one could have predicted. And in that moment, everything changed. What followed next wasn't just a confrontation. It was a life lesson that would make Thomas question everything he thought he knew about family, respect, and love. And the entire bus was about to witness it all. Clint Eastwood's presence seemed to freeze the whole bus in time. The usual chatter and shuffle of feet faded into nothing as his gravelly voice rumbled through the air. Everyone on the bus, young and old, turned their heads toward him, as if collectively holding their breath, waiting for the storm to unfold. Thomas, his face red with anger, stared at Clint with an expression that screamed disbelief. He hadn't expected anyone to step in, let alone someone like Clint Eastwood. "What's your problem, old man?" Thomas sneered, his voice shaking with a mix of embarrassment and defiance. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Clint's eyes locked with Thomas's, and for a brief second, the younger man felt a chill run down his spine. "I think you need to be taught some manners, son," Clint said calmly, his voice still low but filled with an undeniable authority. "You don't treat your mother like that, no matter how old you are. You may think you're too big for respect, but the truth is, without her, you wouldn't be here. And right now, you're showing her nothing but contempt." The words hit like a slap to the face, and for a moment, Thomas seemed frozen, his mind racing for a retort that never came. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Clint continued, his voice steady, like a seasoned warrior delivering a hard truth. "You think your life is tough? You think she doesn't deserve your respect because of her age? Maybe you've forgotten that she carried you, raised you, and fought for you when you couldn't even stand on your own. And now you're treating her like garbage, not on my watch." The bus, which had been filled with an uncomfortable silence, now buzzed with the tension of the moment. Passengers exchanged looks, some nodding, others quietly agreeing with Clint's words. They too had seen the way Thomas had treated his mother, too proud to care, too bitter to love. Mary, who had been silently suffering under the weight of her son's cruelty, looked up at Clint with tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like years, someone was standing up for her. Someone was defending her, not just as a mother, but as a person. Thomas, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably, his face now flushed with a mix of shame and anger. "You don't know anything about me," he muttered. But even as he spoke, the bravado in his voice was starting to crack. Clint didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. "I know enough to see when a man's too proud for his own good. I know enough to see when someone forgets what really matters." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Thomas couldn't shake. For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt the ground beneath him start to shift. The walls he had built around himself, the anger he had carried for years, suddenly felt fragile, like they might crumble at any moment. "You think I'm going to let you talk to your mother like that?" Clint's voice rose slightly, just enough to command everyone's attention. "I don't care who you are. Nobody deserves that, least of all your mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary looked up at her son, her heart heavy, but a flicker of hope shining through the cloud of pain. She had tried over the years to hold on to the belief that things could change, that Thomas might one day remember who she was to him. But in this moment, it wasn't about hope anymore. It was about respect, and for the first time in years, it felt like she might actually get it. Thomas, now standing there like a man caught in a storm, swallowed hard. His shoulders slumped and the anger in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a flicker of guilt. I, I didn't mean it, he said quietly, almost as if the words didn't belong to him. I've just, I've been angry for so long. I don't know how to fix it. Clint looked at him, his expression softening just a little. It's not about fixing it all at once, kid. It's about taking the first step. Apologize. Show your mother you care, and you'll start to see things change. Not just with her, but with yourself. Thomas looked down at his mother, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't filled with resentment. It wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with something else. Something that looked like regret. Something that looked like remorse. He stepped toward her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. Mom, I'm sorry. I've been horrible to you. I don't deserve your love, but I'll try. I'll try to be better. I swear the words were quiet, but they carried a sincerity that had been missing for years. Mary's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. She had waited so long for this moment. Long for it, in fact. The road ahead would be long, and the wounds of the past would not heal overnight. But this was a start. It was a start she had almost given up on. But now, it seemed possible again. Clint, seeing that the moment had come to an end, nodded once, a small gesture of approval. That's all it takes, kid. Don't wait too long to show your mother you care. You'll regret it. And with that, Clint Eastwood, the man who had stepped in to change a life, made his way to the door, his presence still lingering in the air long after he had left. As the bus pulled away, the tension that had once filled the air seemed to lift. Mary and Thomas sat together in silence, the unspoken understanding between them thickening the air. For the first time in a long while, there was hope in the quiet space between them. And just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. A chapter where respect, love, and kindness had a place to grow. The bus continued its journey through the city. The hum of the wheels on the asphalt almost drowned out by the thoughts racing through Mary's mind. She sat quietly beside Thomas, who was still processing what had just unfolded. For years, she had hoped for a moment like this, an apology, a change in attitude. But even now it felt surreal. Thomas, once the little boy who clung to her for comfort and love, had grown into a man who seemed distant, angry, and unrecognizable. The years had taken their toll on him, and somewhere along the way he had lost sight of the bond they once shared. But now something had shifted. Maybe it was Clint's words, or maybe it was the weight of the truth finally sinking in. But there was a softness in Thomas's eyes that had been missing for a long time. He turned to her, his voice quieter this time, almost hesitant. I don't know how to make up for all the times I hurt you, Mom, he said, his words barely above a whisper. I've been a jerk for so long, I don't even know where to start. Mary looked at him, her heart aching for the son she had raised. It wasn't easy for her to see him struggle, to watch him wrestle with the guilt and anger he had buried inside for so long. She had always known he was capable of more than the bitterness that clouded his mind, but she had been powerless to reach him. Now, though, something felt different. He was finally reaching out, finally acknowledging the hurt he had caused. You don't have to make up for anything, Thomas, she said softly, her voice filled with a tenderness that only a mother could convey. You've already taken the first step. Just be honest. Be kind. That's all I've ever wanted from you. Thomas nodded, his face a mixture of relief and confusion. He seemed almost unsure of how to move forward, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes, a desire to make things right, even if it was going to take time. The bus made its next stop, and a few passengers got on, breaking the moment of silence. But for Mary and Thomas, it felt as if the world outside had paused. The bus felt smaller, quieter, as if the weight of their conversation had filled the space. The gentle hum of the engine seemed to lull them both into a reflective silence. Thomas sat back in his seat, staring out the window, lost in thought. Mary, for her part, couldn't stop herself from stealing glances at her son. She had always known he had the potential to be better, to be kinder. She just never knew if he would ever get there. But now, for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But maybe, just maybe, They could rebuild what had been broken. They could start over. The bus ride continued, but the journey between mother and son had taken on a new direction. The road ahead wasn't clear, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time, it didn't feel as impossible as it once had. The twists and turns of their relationship had been painful, but now there was a glimmer of possibility, a chance for healing, for redemption. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. The bus rolled on, and the weight of the past few moments hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. Thomas hadn't said much more since his quiet apology, but Mary could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the physical distance between them now. It was the emotional distance that had begun to close, slowly, cautiously, but steadily. They were no longer standing at the edge of a chasm that seemed too vast to cross. There was a bridge now, fragile as it may be, and maybe, just maybe, it would hold. As the bus made its way through the busy streets, the world outside seemed to blur, a mere backdrop to the deeper, more personal changes unfolding within the two of them. Mary knew that this moment was fleeting, that in the rush of everyday life, it could easily be forgotten, drowned out by the noise of the world. But she also knew that sometimes, moments like these, small, quiet, and often overlooked, were the ones that mattered the most. They were the moments when people changed, when they chose to move beyond their mistakes and try again. And right now, Thomas was doing that. Not perfectly, not all at once, but he was trying. Mary felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sadness or regret. It was a tear of relief. It was a tear that said she had waited for this moment for so long, that she had never truly given up hope, even when things seemed impossible. And now, even if the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew they were finally on the right path. After a few minutes of silence, Thomas finally spoke again, his voice steady but still tinged with vulnerability. I don't expect you to just forgive me, Mom. I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but I want to try. I want to be better. For you. For us. Mary turned to him, her heart full, and smiled softly. You don't have to be perfect, Thomas. You just have to keep trying. The sincerity in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his seat, spoke volumes. He wasn't just saying the words, he was committing to them, in his own way, at his own pace. And that was enough for Mary. They didn't need grand gestures or sweeping declarations. What they needed, what they both needed, was this: the quiet promise to do better, to be better. The bus came to another stop, and as people shuffled off and new passengers filed on, Mary and Thomas remained seated. There was no rush to leave, no need to break the silence. They were content in the stillness, in the shared understanding between them. The chaos of the world outside, the noise, the distractions, seemed distant now. All that mattered in that moment was that they were together, no longer strangers, no longer lost in their own frustrations. They were two people, bound by history, bound by love, trying to find their way back to each other. And as the bus continued its journey, so too did their own. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be times when it felt like they were taking 2 steps backward for every step forward. But Mary knew that the love they had, the love that had been buried under years of resentment and pain, was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. And with that, she felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The bus slowly approached its final stop, and with each passing moment, it felt like the weight of the past was finally being lifted. Thomas looked out the window, lost in thought, but this time, there was no anger in his expression, only a quiet reflection. Mary sat beside him, her heart full, her mind at ease for the first time in years. They had come so far, from a place of resentment and hurt, to this moment of quiet understanding. Their journey together hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Thomas turned to his mother once more, his voice low but steady. I don't know what's next, Mom, but I promise, I'll keep trying. I'll be here. I won't walk away again. Mary smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's all I ever wanted to hear, Thomas. That's all I needed. As the bus came to a stop, the doors opened, and passengers began to disembark. But for Mary and Thomas, There was no hurry to leave. They stayed seated for a few moments longer, their hands still gently resting on each other. It wasn't just the end of the bus ride. It was the end of a chapter in their lives, one that had been filled with pain and distance, but also the beginning of something new. They were not the same people who had gotten on the bus hours ago. They had started to rebuild, to heal. And though